welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're moving away from the familiar trenches of the Western Front, way out to East Africa during World War I. It's a theater often overlooked, but incredibly intense.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating, sprawling conflict.
And our mission today is really to dig into how the very first clashes there, specifically two key battles, Kilimanjaro and Karonga, set the tone for the whole four-year campaign.
You really did. They showed right away it wasn't going to be a straightforward colonial conquest.
We tend to picture 1914 just as Europe descending into static warfare, but, that declaration of war immediately lit fires across colonial borders everywhere.
Instantly. And in East Africa, you had the situation where German forces were suddenly cut off, vastly outnumbered, yet somehow they managed to dictate the fight for years.
It seems like a Pyrenees, doesn't it? How did that even happen?
Well, it starts with a broken agreement. The 1884 Congo Act was supposed to keep colonial areas neutral if war broke out in Europe.
So that went out the window straight away.
Pretty much immediately tossed aside. And so these colonial armies, which were, let's be honest, mostly designed for internal policing, suddenly had to fight each other. Often European-led professional forces on both sides, but with very different initial setups.
Right. And the numbers, they're just staggering when you look at them.
They really are. Think about it. The Allies, eventually they bring in maybe up to 250,000 soldiers, British, South African, Indian, Belgian, Portuguese troops, a huge coalition.
All aimed at taking Germany's Africa.
Exactly, and defending it. Initially, the German Schutztruppe had barely 700 men, mostly African soldiers, the Askaris, led by maybe 200 German officers.
270 versus 250,000? Yeah, how do you even begin?
Well, that's where the German commander, Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, comes in. His strategy wasn't about winning, not in the traditional sense.
Okay, so what was the goal then?
Simple but brutal. Tie up as many Allied troops as possible, keep them busy in Africa, away from the main event in Europe. And these early fights, Longido and Karonga, they're basically the first test runs of that whole approach.
Okay, let's dive into that first major Allied push then. This pincer movement in November 1914. We'll start with the northern part, the attack near Kilimanjaro aiming for Moshi, the Battle of Longido.
Right. The strategic idea was pretty clear. The Allies needed to shut down German activity near the Uganda Railway, which was vital for British logistics. So Brigadier J.M. Stewart leads this force, Indian Expeditionary Force C, about 1,500 soldiers, British and Indian.
And they're heading towards Longido village.
Yeah, right at the foot of Mount Longido. A good spot for observation, dominates the area visually.
But the Germans were already there, weren't they?
They were. Longido was already a base for German patrols raiding the railway. The commander there, Major Georg Kraut, he had a much smaller force, maybe 600 men total.
600, so a mix of Askari and who else?
Askaris, yes. And also, these mounted German settlers, farmers basically, organized into militia units. They called them Schützenkompagnen, highly mobile guys who knew the land.
So November 3rd, 1914, the British attack. What happens?
They attack at dawn. But Kraut, he's smart. He sees he's outnumbered and outgunned in a stand-up fight. So he doesn't try. He uses the terrain.
How so?
It's dense bush, really thick vegetation around the mountain. Kraut pulls his men back up onto higher ground. This forces the British to follow him into that difficult terrain.
And that slows them down. Makes it hard to bring up heavy weapons.
Exactly. They couldn't easily move their mountain guns, their machine guns. It turns into this really brutal day-long struggle, just grinding work in the heat. Everyone's getting exhausted.
And then comes the critical moment, the supply issue you mentioned.
Yes, this is where it gets really interesting tactically. While the main fight is happening, a small German mounted unit, probably some of those settlers, they manage to slip around the British lines.
Okay, and they go for the supplies.
Straight for the supply convoy. And they don't even need to capture it. They just charge in, scatter about 100 mules.
100 mules. That doesn't sound like a huge number in the grand scheme of an offensive. Why was that so decisive?
Because of what they were carrying. It wasn't just ammo or food. It was mainly water.
Water, of course. In that heat, under exertion.
Losing your water supply is catastrophic. It just broke the back of the British effort. They were already exhausted, dehydrated, morale plummeted.
Wow. So the immediate result.
Stewart had no choice, really. He ordered a full retreat. The whole northern offensive just collapsed.
And the casualties reflected that failure.
Absolutely. The British lost 312 men killed, wounded, captured. The German losses were around 109, a major disparity.
So this defeat really put a dampener on British plans in the north for a while.
It did. Kill their enthusiasm for big offensives for months.
Yeah.
But the irony is, Kraut's victorious troops, they didn't get much rest.
No. Where did they go?
They were immediately put on trains and rushed south to Tonga. They had to help repel the other Allied pincer attack that was happening simultaneously.
Right, the southern prong of that initial plan. So Longito proved that a smaller, mobile force could use the terrain to beat a larger one, especially if logistics were fragile.
Precisely. A key lesson learned early on.
Okay, let's pivot then. South, and actually slightly earlier in time, to September 1914. The Battle of Karonga, down on the border with what was then British Nyasaland, now Malawi.
Yes, Karonga. And interestingly, the very first action in this whole theater wasn't on land, it was naval. On Lake Nyasa.
On the lake. Tell me about that.
The British managed to surprise and disable the only German steamship on the lake, the SS Hermann von Wissmann. It was a small gunboat action, but crucial.
Why crucial?
Because it gave the British complete control of Lake Nyasa. And that meant they could move troops and supplies quickly and safely along the lake shore, a massive logistical advantage for anything happening in that southern region.
Okay, so the lake is secured by the British. What prompts the Karonga fight?
Well, the German commander in the south, Major Erich von Langensteinkeller, he knew reinforcements were probably coming for the British via that lake route. He decided he needed to strike Karonga fast before they arrived.
And his force. Similar to Kraut's.
A bit different. He had about 200 regular Schutztruppe, but he also brought along about 200 local irregulars, the Ruga-Ruga.
Ruga-Ruga, who are they?
Local warriors, auxiliaries, really, not formally part of the Schutztruppe. They were armed with, well, a mix of things, Olga rifles, some spears, bows and arrows. Not exactly frontline troops by European standards.
So 400 Germans and auxiliaries heading for Karonga. Who was defending it?
Captain Barton was the British commander there. He had about 400 men, too, but these were highly trained soldiers from the King's African Rifles, the KAR, plus some local European volunteers in the Nyasaland Volunteer Reserve.
Okay, similar numbers, but maybe a difference in training quality between the KAR and the Ruga-Ruga.
Definitely. And then comes a really critical mistake, or maybe overconfidence on the German side.
What did they do?
Langensteinkeller marched his column openly right down the main road along the lake shore. No real attempt at concealment. Meanwhile, Captain Barton, he leads his KAR troops out to intercept. But Barton's men knew the bush. They didn't take the road. They marched parallel, about 2 kilometers inland, completely hidden by the terrain.
Wait, so they just walked past each other?
Essentially, yes. They were marching in opposite directions, hidden from each other. Barton heading towards Karonga, Langensteinkeller also heading towards Karonga, but further out.
That's quite something. So what happens when the Germans reach Karonga?
They launch their attack on September 9th. They start shelling the Karonga Boma, the administrative fort, and apparently a barge that was leaving.
And that noise.
Exactly. That artillery fire alerted Barton's column, who had, by this point, marched past Karonga unknowingly. They hear the guns, realize what's happening, turn around, and race back.
So the Germans are attacking, thinking Barton is still miles away, and suddenly the KAR appear.
Precisely. The unexpected arrival of these well-trained troops completely threw the Germans off balance. Langensteinkeller immediately ordered a retreat.
A hasty retreat, I imagine.
Very hasty, and it quickly turned into a rout. Because Barton wasn't just going to let them walk away.
He pursued them.
He did better. He anticipated their retreat route and set up an ambush at the Kosovo River.
An ambush. That sounds bad for the retreating Germans.
It was devastating. The Kora caught them completely by surprise. The German losses were severe. 154 killed, wounded, or captured. Langensteinkeller himself was wounded, lost an eye.
And Allied losses.
Minimal. Only about 7 killed. It was a crushing defeat for the Germans in the southwest.
So, unlike Longito, where the Germans won, Karonga was a clear Allied victory. What were the consequences?
It effectively knocked the Schutztruppe out of offensive action in that entire region for the rest of the war. They just didn't have the manpower to recover from those losses down there.
And you mentioned a social dimension earlier.
Yes, this is really important. A defeat like that, especially the rout and the ambush, it really damaged German prestige among the local African populations on both sides of the border.
How did that play out?
Well, it influenced local communities. Who do you support? Who looks like they might win? Who do you provide food or intelligence or even labor to? A major defeat like Karonga shifted those calculations. It wasn't just a military loss, it had social and political ripples.
So looking back at these 2 early battles, Longito and Karonga, they almost seem like mirror images in outcome. but they both reveal key aspects of the war to come.
They really do. Longido showed the Germans, look, mobility, using the terrain, hitting weak points like logistics that can work even against bigger forces. Karonga showed everyone, especially the Germans, don't underestimate the Allied African troops like the KAR, and that poor planning or overconfidence could lead to disaster.
And this combination set the stage for Lettow-Vorbeck's long guerrilla campaign.
Exactly. It wasn't going to be about holding ground. It was going to be about movement, about hitting and running, about surviving, and crucially about tying down those Allied resources. Even as the Allies poured in more and more troops, reaching, maybe 100,000 combat soldiers by 1916.
Lettow-Vorbeck just kept moving.
Kept moving, kept retreating strategically, kept fighting this bush war, eventually retreating south, right out of German East Africa and into Portuguese East Africa, what's now Mozambique, in late 1917. He just kept going.
But this kind of warfare, this constant movement, the huge armies involved, it must have had a terrible cost beyond the soldiers fighting.
Oh, astronomical. And this is something we absolutely have to talk about. It's something that often gets lost in the focus on military maneuvers, the carriers.
The porters.
Yeah.
The men carrying supplies.
Yes. The entire campaign on both sides was utterly dependent on human transport, moving food, water, ammunition, even sick and wounded soldiers through incredibly difficult terrain with few roads.
And the numbers involved.
Staggering. Estimates suggest maybe close to 1 million African carriers were conscripted or coerced into service by all sides combined over the 4 years. Maybe 750,000 for the Allies, 100,000, perhaps 200,000 for the Germans.
1 million people.
Yeah.
Just carrying things. What was the impact on that?
It was devastating. These were generally young men taken from their villages. The conditions were appalling. Forced marches, insufficient food, disease. The estimates for carrier deaths are horrifying. Anywhere from 100,000 to maybe 300,000 deaths.
300,000 deaths just among the carriers.
It's possible. From hunger, disease, exhaustion, brutal treatment. And think about the impact back home, too, removing that many young men meant massive labor shortages on farms, contributing to food insecurity.
So the war's impact spread far beyond the battle lines. What about the civilian population who weren't carriers?
They suffered immensely, too, especially after 1916 as large armies moved across the land. Both sides requisitioned food, livestock, whatever they needed.
And the Germans, as they retreated, employed scorched earth tactics.
Increasingly, yes. It was driven by necessity, from their perspective, deny supplies to the pursuing Allies. But it meant burning fields, destroying grain stores, destroying villages.
Leading to famine.
Directly. Particularly in the southern part of the colony after the Schutztrupp retreated in 1917. There was a terrible famine. The overall human cost of the war for German East Africa is estimated at perhaps 650,000 lives lost.
650,000?
Yeah.
That's nearly a tenth of the population at the time.
An almost unimaginable catastrophe. It really undermines the narrative of a purely military campaign. There's a chilling quote from a German doctor who served with Lettow-Vorbeck.
What did he write?
He wrote in his memoirs something like, "We left destroyed fields, looted magazines, and for the near future, hunger behind. We were no longer ambassadors of culture. Our trace consisted instead of death, plunder, and destroyed villages."
A stark admission. It paints a very different picture from the usual story of the gallant campaign.
It really does. Yet, despite all this, the story that took hold, particularly in Germany after the war, was quite different. Well, Lettow-Vorbeck technically never surrendered in the field. He only laid down arms after hearing about the armistice in Europe, and even that message was apparently slightly garbled. So this narrative of the undefeated army holding out against impossible odds became incredibly powerful.
The clean Wehrmacht myth almost had a precursor in East Africa.
In a way, yes. Lettow-Vorbeck became a national hero in the interwar period. Numerous memoirs were written celebrating the campaign's military aspects, focusing on the tactical skill, the endurance, the fact they tied down so many Allied troops.
Conveniently overlooking the 500,000 or more African deaths.
Largely overlooking, or at least minimizing, the devastating human cost to the African population, both carriers and civilians. The focus remained firmly on the military achievement, the resourcefulness against the odds.
Which brings us to a final thought, something for you, our listeners, to consider. We have this campaign, seen by some as a brilliant military feat of evasion and endurance, keeping 250,000 Allied soldiers occupied.
Right, the narrative of Lettow-Vorbeck's tactical genius.
But then we have the staggering human cost, potentially over 500,000 non-combatant African deaths, due to famine, disease, forced labor, directly caused by the fighting and the army's actions.
An appalling tragedy.
So the question to leave you with is this. Should the historical memory of this campaign be dominated by the military narrative, the undefeated surrender, or should the immense devastating impact on the people of East Africa take center stage? What truly defines the legacy of this forgotten front?